Where should go? Don't worry, if you don't come up again. Like a Pam. A mine. You just pretend to pull her in. I'm getting blinder and blinder the older I get. Me too. You see how big these look like? Yeah. Sharon, do you have your remarks? Okay, you want me to leave these up? Yeah. Okay. Oh. You ready to start? You want to get started? Okay, okay. Good morning. Hi. Can everyone hear? Outstanding. They're making me use a microphone, but I normally don't need one, so I'll just highlight that. Just want to say thank you very much. Good morning. I'm Erin Singshensuk, the Executive Director at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. We're very happy to welcome you all here this morning. Since its establishment in 1998, USCIRF has monitored and reported on religious freedom conditions abroad and has made bipartisan policy recommendations to Congress and the administration on advancing religious freedom or belief, freedom of religion or belief, or FORB for all. Throughout our work, we have emphasized not only the ways women experience religious freedom violations and religious discrimination, but also the unique role that women play in advancing freedom of religion or belief. Our groundbreaking 2017 publication on women and religious freedom was authored by now UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, Professor Nazila Ghaneya. The report emphasizes the common universality of both women's rights and freedom of religion or belief in international law. It calls for civil society communities working for women's rights and FORB to be brought together more effectively. There must be a mobilizing role through the hosting of fora and debates to nurture these connections. The FORB Women's Alliance is fulfilling this precise objective, bringing together individuals and groups working actively on advancing women's religious freedom. As a U.S. government agency, USCIRF is keen to see the outcomes of this work and consider the recommendations. We look forward to continuing to engage with the Women's FORB Women's Alliance on these important conversations. And then with that, what I'd like to do is also turn that over to USCIRF Commissioner Sharon Kleinbaum to provide some opening remarks. Again, welcome and thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Make sure you speak into the mic.
Yeah, okay. How's this?
That's right.
Okay, welcome everybody and good morning to everyone who's joining us here today. And thank you, Erin. It's an honor to serve with you on the commission. And thank you to Luann Sabatier and Judy Golub for today's event. We are deeply grateful for all the contributions in and your dedication to advancing religious freedom for all women. As a rabbi, I care deeply about this. As a woman, I care deeply about this. And as an American, in the moments that we're facing today, facing what international religious freedoms look like, and we understand that women are the canary in the coal mine when it comes to international religious freedom in general. I'm delighted on behalf of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom to welcome you here today and grateful for your participation. Part and parcel of the Commission's work is monitoring the provision of religious freedom to people of all genders. In recent years, USCIRF has documented a concerning trend of religious freedom violations specifically targeted at and affecting women. Governments restrict women's religious freedoms in basically two ways. First, they invoke religion as a basis for justifying laws and policies, often related to personal status issues that limit women's agency and autonomy in ways that also limit their religious freedom. Examples include limitations on the right to convert or to marry a person of a different religious faith. And second, states enforce laws that deny individual women their right to freedom of religion or belief as outlined in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thank you, Eleanor Roosevelt. It is also often the case that certain laws targeting religious minority communities have a disproportionate effect on women generally or on some women. Critical to USCIRF's work is the principle that women's religious freedom is not a woman's issue, but an IRF issue more broadly. Freedom of religion or belief is a universal human right to which all people are entitled. This universal protection, however, is only as strong as its weakest link. Any restriction on freedom of religion or belief for any group lowers the level of everyone's protection by setting a new and a lower standard. We know how this works. That is why the important work the Alliance is doing advances religious freedom not only for women, but for all people. From USCIRF's perspective, there are important steps the US government can take to advance freedom of religion or belief for women. First, it must include and encourage other governments to include women in conversations on advancing religious freedom around the world. This should be a duh. It isn't. Decisions affecting women but made only by men cannot provide the equal protection of freedom of religion or belief that Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights requires. Second, the US government must assess the impact of its policies to advance religious freedom across genders. It must advocate for changes to laws and procedures that benefit all women, rich or poor, theist or non-theist, straight or LGBTQI+, majority or minority faith. Finally, the United States should take an approach that centers the experience, knowledge, and expertise of the local civil society groups in country that work actively on issues of women's religious freedom. This ground-up approach affords women the agency to be their own advocates and creates more equitable partnerships in places where patriarchal systems entrenching women's second-class citizen status have become the norm. Civil society organizations like those each of you represent play a crucial role in USCIRF's work, whether it's elevating issues of concern in specific countries, connecting us with activists on the ground, or alerting us to collaborative efforts to advance religious freedom. Our relationships with civil society help USCIRF fulfill our mandate from Congress to report unflinchingly on violations of international religious freedom. As a commissioner, it has been truly remarkable to see how people whose theological beliefs could not be more different can unite under a common cause of advancing religious freedom for all. The Forb Women's Alliance is fulfilling an essential role in this regard by connecting existing initiatives across religions, continents, and generations that advance women's freedom of religion or belief. It is impressive how the Alliance enthusiastically engages the diversity and pluralism that these initiatives represent, overcoming the differences that so often stymie progress. This pluralistic approach is a strong foundation for the Alliance, especially at a time when women are increasingly targeted on the basis of religion or belief. whether those affected are Uyghur Muslim women subjected to forced sterilization by China, women sentenced to death on religious grounds by Iran, or Christian or Yazidi girls kidnapped, raped, or killed by terrorist groups in Nigeria or Iraq, joining together in solidarity to take action to advance religious freedom for women has never been more important. Your work is already changing the narrative of FORB and women's rights by showing that women are not victims, but are active participants with a voice in the struggle for greater religious freedom. It is an honor for me to be here with you today. I encourage each of you to continue to mobilize stakeholders through the FORB Women's Alliance various initiatives, leading by example to demonstrate the ways in which women are their own agents of change in advancing freedom of religion or belief and all those related human rights around the world. Thank you so very much.
I was going to leave the name tag up there as rabbi, but I don't think I'm very convincing. Do you? Good morning. I'm Luann Sabatier. Over 100 leaders with expertise on freedom of religion or belief, human rights, and women's rights met in Washington, D.C., June 21st, 2019, in this building. Thank you, Aaron, and you, sir. To discuss the intersection of the issues that Rabbi Kleinbaum just mentioned. The group focused on how to improve understanding and advance an agenda that places women at the center of efforts to advance freedom of religion and belief, thought, or expression. And it was men and women. Together, that 8 hours, which was very rigorous, we explored ways of framing a new narrative, working on the issues, and proposing a way forward that could help shape an agenda. Emerging from that discussion, 100 people who are all advocates and activists and different opinions, came a current landscape of actors and initiatives. There was one desire that came through. Can we please improve collaboration across sectors? Although it would be 4 years later, not just because of the pandemic, but because of the difficulty in trying to find a way to frame this. The 2019 meeting set the stage to launch our accelerator FORB Women's Alliance. Many of you may have heard of a tech accelerator, particularly in Silicon Valley. Well, just as a business or a tech accelerator gives companies access to mentorship, training, funding, and moral support that help them become stable and self-sufficient, FORB Women's Alliance is a human rights women's accelerator. To our knowledge, this did not exist. There are many advocates who are on the stage, but who is willing to quietly behind the scenes have those difficult conversations, find the common thread, get people in the room, and most importantly, prepare people for the practicalities of surviving, running a business or an organization. If you have ideas, if you are the biggest champion in the world, but you have no funds, you are crippled. To help FORB Women's Alliance better understand how we could bring this shared vision together to life in a meaningful, forward, progressive way, we partnered with Gender and Religious Freedom in 2022 to field a Fetzer Institute-funded preliminary landscape study of women in FORB. We know that women are persecuted. That research has been done a decade ago. What we don't know or did not before this work began is, so how are we doing? Who's working on what? How's it going? Where's the wins? Where's the gaps? Down in the weeds with the people in the grassroots. So Gender and Religious Freedom, as I said, has been a wonderful partner for us. They are a global network that connects practitioners and advocates to facilitate training, advocacy, and research with a gender-specific focus. That project team, most of them are here today. I'd like you to hold your applause because you are going to clap, I hope, for them. If they would please stand. Lead researcher from the UK, Kate Ward. She is a convener of Gender and FORB Working Group for the United Kingdom FORB Forum. Lead researcher Elizabeth Lane Miller, who is a women's persecution specialist for Open Doors International. Rachel Morley, researcher, PhD student from the UK, and two people who are not with us, Helene Fisher, gender prosecution specialist for Open Doors, and Marwa. Would you please show your great numbers? Many thanks to the research participants working around the world. Without their cooperation, and they have remained anonymous in all of our data, no names, no organizations. But they gave their time, their shared experiences, and their insight. And let me just tell you something right now. This is not about FORB Women's Alliance or gender specialists or the people on the stage. This is about them. This is about some of them on the stage, the workers on the ground. There's someone I want to ask in particular, Erin Singh-Shinshuk, because she has been not only a research participant, but a champion from day one 5 years ago. Would you please stand?
I can just say one thing, I couldn't do it without the entire team.
Thank you, USERP team. This funding was provided by the Fetzer Institute, which is an incredible organization. They lay low and they think and fund big. They think and fund big. Some of you may know they do some of the religion projects for the Aspen Institute on religion in PR, and they funded this study. And not only Fetzer, there is one person in this room that is the reason we were able to get off the ground. And she remembered a conversation from 5 years ago. Chelsea Bombino, would you please stand? From the Fetzer Institute. She is our program officer. Thank you, Chelsea. I want to recognize two people. I didn't save the best for last. I saved for last the people who were there at midnight when you call and say, I found a typo. They're there at 2 a.m. when you say, I don't have enough Diet Coke or turkey sandwiches for the program, much less the discussion guides. First, let me recognize the person who's an incredible designer. She did the work on FORB Women Alliance website, forbwomen.org, anything that is graphic, and this incredible report, Suzanne Reed. Please stand. And last is partner in crime. Judith Golub is a co-founder and is done incredible service and work, her relationships, her advice, her insight, and she's tireless and fearless. Judy, thank you. And finally, there are 3 people in the room, which is the umbrella group. And without them, aside from Fetzer, we would not be here today. And that is our strategic partner, 21 Wilberforce, our executive director, John Gonger, Trent, and Sandra. Would you please stand? Thank you. And now we will hear from Elizabeth Lane Miller, a few remarks.
Thank you, Lou. Everyone here at USERF, and of course, many thanks to Fetzer, as you heard. So I just get to share a little bit about the research. I am really pleased to share with you some highlights from this first global landscape analysis of women in FORB. We together, as you heard, Forbes Women's Alliance and Gender and Religious Freedom conducted this analysis, and it's really quite exciting to me. And Judy asked me to share a little background of kind of why I find it so exciting and some of the effort. And that is the fact that in my role as women's persecution specialist at Open Doors International, I have led a team for World Watch Research since 2018 studying women and Forbes. Now, our pioneering research has examined that overlap between religious persecution and other compounding factors. The first factor that we studied was gender. And as background, World Watch Research has studied Christian populations, but we have long believed that our findings can be extrapolated to other faith communities. So in this report here that we have done with Forbes Women's Alliance, what do we mean by Forbes and women? Well, we're looking at how religious persecution is compounded by multiple vulnerabilities. And we had a wonderful presentation from Rabbi Kleinbaum about some of those, and you heard them. This is an illustration of many of those. A woman trying to live out her chosen faith doesn't just face violations of her freedom of religion or belief, but also, in many contexts, gender inequality. That's often propped up by cultural norms or legal disparities. And that might be also compounded by poverty or other resource scarcity. It could be impacted by political or tribal conflict. And perhaps she's a child and she's just that much more vulnerable because of her age. For a long time, these infringements on her human rights were treated separately from her expression of freedom of religion or belief. But that's not how they're experienced by women and girls worldwide. We worked on describing at Open Doors these dynamics of compound experience. And when interested, we do have our most recent report. But we're not the only ones who have worked on setting the stage. And also, you heard from Erin about the wonderful reports from USERF. Stephanus Alliance, a Norwegian community, has also worked on talking about some groundbreaking research on women and Forbes, and they do some wonderful awareness trainings around the world. Now, violence and discrimination has been illuminated in these reports, but the challenging landscape of women and Forbes activity has largely not been explored until now. I'm so excited that this Forbes Women's Alliance research report has expanded this scope to look beyond just one religious group to produce what I think might be the first global multi-faith study on the state of women in Forbes. So we think it's groundbreaking because it, first of all, provides better documentation and understanding of this global landscape, and thus helps those who are trying to make a practical difference in contexts around the world to understand the roadblocks. And if we can name them, hopefully we won't keep running into the same roadblocks again and again. We also hope to highlight here that despite these compound vulnerabilities and the barriers that accompany them, women have accomplished a great deal. This report also underscores what earlier studies have found. There is a need for advocacy and activism. In order to empower religious freedom, we also have to empower women and girls. And we hope it identifies solutions to address the challenges facing women in Forbes and provide ways to accelerate religious freedom or belief for all. So how do we go about this? Well, you heard how it started with an amazing gathering in 2019. This then turned into some more convening in this past year of individuals with diverse professional, institutional, religious, and geographic backgrounds. And we tried to find ways to better define the gaps and problems, as well as the opportunities and successes. We wanted to better understand those gaps and problems, and we wanted to be sure to celebrate what women have done. In these focus groups and interviews, we have explored these barriers and opportunities through 3 dimensionalities. And we identify them in our full report as mindset, systems, and structures. So we go through the mindsets that are the attitudes and ideas that can normalize these compounding factors, the systems, which are processes or methods that can be gender blind and therefore inhibit the ability to address gender-specific religious persecution. And thirdly, the structure, the relationships formed that sometimes prevent addressing this compound religious persecution or prevent access to solutions. The persecution of women and girls that they face, that persecution has often been hidden. But their unique voices and capacities should not also be hidden. Rather, they should be celebrated and supported so that we can actually accelerate forward and help create sustainable change in our worldwide communities. So on that, we can have Kate and Judy are going to share some research findings and recommendations. And then we will have the pleasure of hearing from our panelists, 3 women leaders who have participated and are making huge differences in their efforts in support of women and girls. We're so grateful for them.
Thank you very, very much, Elizabeth, and thank you. That's it, and it's great to be with you. And you can imagine that when I had the privilege to be welcomed to join this research of gender and religious freedom, we were not going to turn this opportunity down. We already had so much in hand that Elizabeth has shared with us, but we knew that there was more to come. And we knew that we wanted to be partners and collaborators with this. So for us, it's just been an incredible opportunity. The findings and recommendations that Judy and I are going to bring, I'll go over the findings and then Judy will go over the recommendations. But to be honest, they've confirmed an awful lot of what I've seen in the last 15 years of working in this area. I've just talked to Annie. She'd been in this field for the same length of time, and we have just because it's normal to assume that addressing forward women, that we are ensuring that 50% of those who suffer from breaches of FORB are included and at the table. But my experience is, my friends, that women are the majority of those who face FORB violations. That actually they, for one reason or another, they are the greater adherents to religion around the world. And so, for instance, when I was in India last month, I was talking to the minorities there. They were a Christian group, but also we obviously have minorities that are Muslim as well. And they said, through all the states that I interviewed and discussed with them, that they had up to 70 to 80% of their churches, the worship communities, were women. So this isn't just bringing half or 50%. This is bringing the majority voice back or into the space in which they should have been anyway. And you heard from Elizabeth, mindset, structures, systems, and you'll read that going through the report time and time again. So it reminds me, being here today, that I'm not alone. And if you talk to any of us, we sometimes get a little bit choked up about that. You are all leaders. We know that leadership is lonely and it can be isolated because people don't understand what we carry with us. But to be isolated in leadership in this area is nearly crushing. But that's not the people we met in this report. They have not been crushed. And so, like me, this has come together because we wanted to coordinate, we wanted to collaborate, and also we recognised we needed greater resources. So Judy, you've worked in this space for a while as well, haven't you? And so what were your highlights when you interviewed women like we've got here and the focus groups that we ran? What were your highlights?
Well, I have been in this space for a while, but I have been in awe of the energy, creativity, and courage of the women working in this field, be it the grassroots, national, international, regional levels. They have refused to be discouraged or pushed back by compound barriers of gender, cultural norms, economics, patriarchy, or mono-religious approaches. What they have done with the very minimum often is extraordinary and demonstrates potential about what more could be done with more support and collaboration. And the support and the collaboration are equally important. Many of the participants also talked about outside agencies and governments, excuse me, going into the communities and talking only to the men, when often the problem and the solutions lay with the women. And women are so ready to join the table, a necessary step to accelerate for all. I'd now like to turn it back to Kate to talk about the findings.
Okay, Judy. Well, on your seats, you picked up this piece of these notes, which are a wonderful summary of the report. If you go to page 6, you'll see it in front of you. Sometimes that helps some of your eyes. For other eyes in the room, you might want to look at the screen that's also in front of you there. So have a little look at that. And you'll have time to go over this yourself afterwards, but I will just go through it very briefly, and then we'll go on to recommendations, and Judy will take us through there. So you'll see that both isolated networks and siloing between all rights and other sectors, especially women's rights, have disadvantaged women advocating for relief and redress, and exacerbated their gendered experience of persecution on the basis of religion or belief. So in summary, my friends, isolating networks and silos has been detrimental to the experience of women, and in many examples we saw, it has worsened the experience of women facing religious or belief-based persecution. So isolating networks and siloing. The second key finding we found was exclusion. That's a key word in this one. Exclusion from what? Power structures. Additionally, marginalizes, undermines, understudies, and under-resources efforts to address fraud violations committed against women and girls, and limits their capacity to effectively act. And so exclusion affects capacity to act, and that has been down to power structure. The first one, brief, but holds so much with it, that cultural and religious norms can be creatively and courageously challenged. And you will see, if you talk to any of us in the room, we'll tell you of examples that are going ahead to do that. We can tell you of tools that we have in our hands that we've been trying to address that, and that has been effective. But that they can be creatively challenged. And then the fourth one, collaboration is a form of empowerment to increase capacity, influence, and relief. Time and time again, we heard in the interviews in the focus groups, collaboration, collaborating, collaborating. And it was genuine. It wasn't just because that's the word for the moment. It was genuine. And then the last one, structural change is necessary, the necessary accelerator for addressing fraud and women's rights. But it requires external catalysts. And that's not within the agency of this group, because they are unempowered to have the necessity and the resources to create the space for themselves at the table. So in summary, my key words over these findings: isolating networks and siloing exacerbate this situation. Exclusion from power structures limits effectiveness and capacity. Cultural and religious norms can be addressed, particularly creatively and courageously. Collaboration is a form of empowerment, and structural change is a necessary accelerator, and that requires external catalysts such as those in the room, because the agency is not currently within that community. Judy, I'd like to hand over to you. Let's see what was recommended.
Thank you. You can find the recommendations in the handout as well.
You need to
there.
speak up. You can't hear you.
You can find the recommendations here as well as on the wall. So there's 6 recommendations, and the report hopes to confirm what they are. So the 6 are: the first one is provide training and training and education to identify the core underlying issues and the challenging circumstances surrounding women and FORB. B, identify and model the positive impact, innovation, and successes of women in FORB. C, highlight that FORB is a human right with the same standing as other human rights and explore how one human right never ever can be used to extinguish another. D, probe the connections between FORB and other human rights, especially women's rights. And E, unmask the misuse of religious dicta that in reality are cultural norms that serve political, economic, and other interests, especially the patriarchy, to reinforce the status quo and its allocation and insertion of power and control. So the second recommendation is activists should be trained to conduct qualitative and quantitative research, including data collection and other initiatives to capture information. There simply isn't enough right now. 3, there should be more collaboration between individuals and organizations working on women and FORB issues in other sectors. And this collaboration needs to happen in safe spaces and platforms. 4, explore opportunity to further dimension existing projects or research by including issues relevant to women in FORB. For instance, surveys that are already on, just add some questions that have to do with women in FORB. 5, funders and other leaders should recognize that the future vitality and health of the movement depends on their support for individuals and organizations working on women and fund these efforts accordingly. Finally, number 6, FORB civil society groups and organizations, individuals, alliances, and networks led by women and girls, especially those working at the grassroots, have earned the right to be heard. These women leaders should be equal partners and participants in FORB programs, policy making, and implementation. So it's policy making, programs, and implementation. All 3 are important. I'd like to now turn it back to Kate.
So next we're going to actually hear from some contributors to this research. These key findings that I mentioned and the recommendations, they're going to come alive. Okay, and you can read these things, you know, you didn't need to be in the room really to hear what we've said, but we want this to come alive. And so they're going to see how actually the recommendations were emerged from their experience and what they bring to the table. So let's start to hear from our contributors. Over to you, Judy.
So I'm so pleased we'll be hearing from these 3 leaders. Let me introduce them briefly. Harry Ibrahim is the founder and executive director of the Free Yazidi Foundation. The foundation is one of the leading Yazidi civil society organizations run by Yazidi women that provides humanitarian support to the Yazidi community in Iraq and beyond. Judith Marwana is a founding member and current chair of the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations, which advocates for a peaceful negotiated settlement to the ongoing Anglophone crisis conflict in the English-speaking regions of the Cameroon. She is also a steering committee member of the Cameroon Humanitarian Relief Initiative, an NGO providing assistance to prisoners, IDPs, and refugees in the conflict. Finally, Ani Donenfeld is the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values and the founder of the umbrella human rights organization Alliance of Inclusive Muslims. I was talking to Annie, and she wondered that maybe that some of you may be wondering why a person with a Jewish sounding name, last name, is a founder of 2 Muslim organizations. I'll tell you. Ani was born in Malaysia and raised Muslim and is married to a Dutchman. That's for that. By the end of this panel, I hope we have shown 3 things. 1, just as women face compound persecution for their religion or belief, freedom of religion or belief is a compound right. It is intricately tied to other basic freedoms, including that of association and expression, especially for women, and key rights, especially women's rights and women and girls' right of equal access to healthcare, education, and housing and other essential services. 2, women and girls working in Ford-related activities, especially at the grassroots level, provide much of the movement's energy. It's the gas, folks. 3, the future vitality and health of the Ford movement depends on the support for individuals, organizations working for women and girls, and they're having a seat at the table as equal partners and participants in Ford programs, policy making, and implementation. So Perry, Judith, and Ani each will now speak for 3 minutes about what really matters to them. Let's start with Perry.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you everyone for being here. I'll start with starting the Free Yazidi Foundation in August 2014. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Maybe it's better.
That's better.
Yeah. So I'll start talking about when I first started the Free Yazidi Foundation in August 2014. I saw my people suffer. The Islamic State was on their way to kill the men and kidnap the women and children. So the first thing I thought was like, okay, this is unbelievable. My people are trying to flee the Islamic State. They want to remain Yazidi. What can I do? What can I do for the women? And I started the Free Yazidi Foundation, and I will say that it was very, very difficult. Having no funds, more than 300 euro to start the organization, it was a struggle to get the organization off of its feet, in the sense that any grant or any opportunity that we were looking at, like I was alone and I started the organization, and it was not easy to show people a track record. We were very lucky that Gucci's Champ for Change saw a presentation of mine in the UN, and they said, we need to support this organization. Immediately we could start a women's center. And then we moved from that point onward. I volunteered for more than 3-4 years. And finally, after 7 years, we were able to go for grants as a prime, US government grants. It took 7 years. Survivors of genocide, survivors of persecution, especially women, cannot wait 7 years until they have access to billions and billions of dollars that are dedicated to their recovery. That is unbelievable. So that's the first point I want to make. And we're grateful to be able to be going after these grants as a prime, and now be able to also help and support Christian organizations and other minorities as well. The second thing is, my people are still suffering. This year, it will be 9 years since the Yazidi genocide perpetrated by the Islamic State. My people are still in camps. There's no hope. They're losing any chances of creating a better life and a recovery. Both government of Iraq and Kurdistan are not willing to take the next steps to ensure that my people can go back home and feel safe and secure and build a future. Last point I want to make is, why do we need to include gender when we talk about religious freedom and have any dialogue on religious freedom? When I first went to Iraq as executive director of the Free Yazidi Foundation, I had organized a meeting with another Yazidi organization with the religious leaders. And I was sitting there next to the religious leaders, and bit by bit, I was shoved away, until I was ending up on the floor. I was not on my seat anymore because it was packed with men. I was the only woman there. From that point onward, and this was the early stages, this was like in 2015, I knew that there is no voice for women around the table when it comes to religious freedom dialogue, but the issues are related to women. We're talking about women with children born from rape. We're talking about Yazidi women who were literally enslaved in the 21st century. A lot was about the genocide against the Yazidis related to gender issues. But there was no seat at the table. But I know there's many more questions, so I'll stop here.
Judith?
Greetings, everybody. It's really an honor for me to be here because my background, some of you might think she's speaking English. I come from Cameroon, and I know very few people actually understand that Cameroon is a bilingual country. But I come from the English-speaking regions of Cameroon. So there is the French, which used to be East Cameroon, and there's the English, which is English-speaking, and we used to be a trust territory of the United Kingdom. At the moment, there is actually an ongoing civil war, which is very underreported, between the English-speaking regions and the predominantly French government. I'll come to the history later. But a few years back, this marginalization morphed into a full-blown civil war in 2017. And in that civil war, the government actually just retaliated simple demonstrations, a peaceful demonstration. The government retaliated with brute force. So that became, of course, a civil war. What's been going on? For the past 6 to 7 years, as we all know in a conflict, the main people suffering are women and children. Over 6,000 people have been killed. That's the conservative number. And in those 6 to 7 years, most kids have not been to school. Schools have been closed. And we all know that in such a situation, women, the security is bad. Most of the time, most of us were brought up by going to Catholic schools, to religious schools. But during the conflict, both the government and the armed groups are attacking the religious schools and religious establishments. So that's reducing access to women to both schools, even hospitals that are run by the churches. It is causing a lot of harm to women and children. In addition to that, women are not listened to. Women, as we know, are most of the time the ones that suffer, but are also the ones that push for peace and justice. But we are not being listened to. So what happened is we in the diaspora came up and realized that we could help by forming NGOs, which is why a group of us and the chair of that organization decided that we needed to help the situation and form such NGOs like the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation and CHRI. So we not only advocate for a peaceful resolution to the conflict, but we also provide humanitarian assistance to the women, to IDPs, to refugees, and people who are suffering from the conflict. I was really, really happy when we were approached by FOB and Judy and Lou to be able to take part in this study, because I think organizations like this trying to intersect the effects of conflict on women, on religion, is really, really helpful so that groups don't work in silence. We need all the assistance we can, because women are not only suffering because of the conflict, but the conflict is exacerbating religious discrimination that was already taking place. And for me, just the fact that women back home used to go to church to be educated, but the security is not giving them that, the security of the conflict is not giving them that opportunity. Women are becoming more and more relegated to the background. I'll give an example. Culturally, men at home do the burials. They do the digging of the graves. But they've now all gone into the bushes for conflict. So now those roles are being done by women. Religious rites that were done by men who have now left the village is done by women. So work like this for me, I'm happy to be, an honor to be part of this, because it's highlighting what we are going through back home because of the conflict, and hopefully highlights and brings together people like yourselves to help not just end the conflict, but to promote women's rights in such situations. Thank you.
Thank you. Honey?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hannibal, Muslims for Progressive Values. So I come from the context of
not working.
text. Here I go. Yeah?
Yeah, it's too close.
On your chin. Okay. No, that's good. All right, thank you. Anis Vanderveld, Muslims for Progressive Values.
It's not working.
There we go.
Give her another one.
Testing. Okay. So I I was raised in a Muslim family that was actually very positive and very enlightened and very egalitarian in nature. So I wasn't raised in an Islamic or Muslim society that was where I became bitter about being Muslim, as what I see in many of the advocates in this room when it comes to the intersectionality of women, gender, and religious freedom. So that's I'm coming from a position of privilege, and I come from a position of love and compassion for all people. And as a privileged person, I feel that it is my duty to lift up many of the human rights abuses towards women and girls in Muslim societies in particular, as well as LGBT Muslims, in the context of Islam. And so, but I also have to share with you that I do also this work as an American Muslim who has been discriminated in the name of religion here in the United States. A lot of the time we look at this issue as being an issue in Muslim majority countries or countries with Muslim minorities, but here in the West, we also have these issues. So I just wanted to like put that in your head as well. As far as the context from which I was being discriminated in the name of religion, I'm a songwriter producer. When 9/11 happened, I decided, well, in this very alpha male environment, I wanted to insert my female voice in a musical form. And I was really surprised at the discrimination of me as a female singer, where my voice is to be covered, very much like Orthodox Judaism, actually. And also the woman's body voice is actually a sexual entity. And so therefore we have to be covered. And that's a form of censorship. Now, all of this in context, opened up this plethora of problems for me when I decided to embark on a study, on a journey to relearn Islam for myself. And so this box of problems just popped up, like all these issues that are within the Muslim community that needed to be addressed. And therefore, I founded Muslims for Progressive Values, and then the umbrella organizations, Alliance of Inclusive Muslims, because many, many Muslim organizations are also yearning for a different interpretation of Islam, because the status quo does not work for them, it does not work for their society. I want to end with one question and one idea to the root of the problem, is that a lot of funders don't want to address the question of religion because it's a sensitive topic, and particularly progressive foundations. They're either extremely secular and they're almost anti-theist, or when it comes to organizations such as us, where it takes us forever to even be compliant to their requirements, application requirements, it is as if because we're self-critical, that makes us almost Islamophobic. I'm like, no, I am born raised Muslim. I'm coming from a loving and compassionate. I want a better society for the Muslims, especially Muslim girls. And so don't frame me as Islamophobic. So some of these foundations are also fearful of funding progressive Muslim organizations for fear of being labeled Islamophobes. Yeah. Just saying.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to now be asking some questions to further hone in on the issues. Let's start with Judith. What are the root causes of conflict in Cameroon and its effect on women and children, and how is the conflict related to religious freedom?
Just to expand, thanks, Julie. Just to expand on what I said earlier, the conflict originated from the fact that the 80% French-dominated government has tried so hard to, I don't want to use the word assimilate, but to destroy the British heritage or the English heritage of the English-speaking regions. So the two federated states came together, and it was meant to be a partnership of two equal states and a bilingual country. But gradually, since 1960, the French have sort of invaded the English-speaking region and infiltrated the schools, the judicial system with the French-speaking language and the French way of doing things. And gradually, the English population has revolted. It's been simmering for that long. And then in 2016, it became, as I explained earlier, a full-blown civil war. a lot of things have broken down within the system. As of now, the violence is actually escalating because the non-state armed groups, the English non-state armed groups, are becoming more sophisticated. They are using IEDs, they are using RPGs against the military, the government military. But how has it affected women and children? I can tell you that, for instance, a lot of the refugees or the IDPs are in the bushes. The villages have been raised by the government forces. Women are having to have children in the forest, deliver babies in the forest. They're having to resort to using moss plants or cloths as their pads because they cannot afford to come out of the bushes and go and buy simple things and sanitary products. Like I said earlier, burial ceremonies are being done by women. They have lost their farms. They can't do agriculture anymore, so they cannot go to the market to sell. Some are having to get into prostitution. They are being raped. And this brings me to where religion falls in, because these same women who are raped or go into prostitution, when they turn to the church or to the religious for help, they are being castigated. But we know that the reasons for them doing that is because of the war, but they are being castigated by the church and the religious for having fallen prey to such things. Like I said earlier, education, most of us got our education from the church, but the churches are being harassed by both the military and the non-state armed groups. Another thing as well is that a lot of the churches have been burned down. Those that are far and between. So it is difficult for women to trek because of the security to get to those churches for their education. For children, they have not been to school. Children are being employed by the non-state armed groups to join the army. Others are having to go into employment and not finish their education. And the security as well for these children. Some are being smuggled, some are being peddled and sold off. So my hope, and the hope is that the international community pays more attention to this conflict, because even if you take away the government and you look just at the religious leaders need to pay more attention. Most of the time, the churches are full, but once they come in, give their tithes, give their alms and leave, the church doesn't pay attention anymore. And they're not out there advocating to make sure that the conflict is resolved. So our hope is that work like this will highlight this even more, and religion will try to play a bigger role in trying to help solve the conflict.
Thank you. Next question to Ani. Could you tell us more about starting MPV and about one of the programs you mentioned to me, #ImamsForShe?
Yes, so Muslims for Progressive Values, our mission is to basically create a culture of human rights.
Can you speak up?
To create a culture of human rights. Because sometimes, like for example, in Kenya, you have laws where child marriage is illegal, but still in the Muslim enclaves, you still have children being forced into marriage at a young age, like 13, 15, rather than the 18, which is the legal age. So sometimes, even in the United States, we had a law against FGM, but there were actually, they were being done undercover in not just clinics, for example, in Detroit, that was a particular case. So you may have laws even, but I think we need to come to a point where culture itself is really rooted in human rights and gender equality. And so that is the work of Muslims for Progressive Values. And our signature program is ImamsForShe, where we work with religious leaders, male religious leaders. And we've had a lot of success in Burundi, DRC, Rwanda, and now we're expanding to Burkina Faso. And in the partners that we have are these religious male leaders actually do their Friday sermons where they advocate for women and girls' rights, because they have to change the cultural mindset, the mindset of the community, the constituency themselves, to really move that along for us to really enable women and girls to have that right to self-determination. A lot of times people don't talk about, well, we're talking about 2030 and we are expecting these benchmarks to the countries to meet these benchmarks. This is not going to happen if we don't ask the hard questions. For example, when businesses are putting applications or putting out a job call for work, and the women are not stepping up because they don't qualify, then the question we should be asking ourselves is, why don't they qualify? Well, because they are not advancing to, you know, high school or university level. Then the next question should be, well, why aren't they advancing to that level of education? Well, it's because they're married off at a young age. And then the next question we should be asking them is, well, why are they being married off at such a young age? Well, it's because the imams have been preaching that girls should be married off as soon as they hit puberty. And so until we get to that root problem, which is the religious leaders, then we will never get that to the point of Sustainable Development Act, right? To the SDGs. So that's why we started the Imams for She initiative. Okay, we know what the problem is. The root of the problem is, let's go to the root of the problem. And let's work with imams and religious leaders and community influencers that actually have influence over the constituency to impact that change. So that is the Imams for She initiative. There are indicators, there are good indicators and negative indicators. The negative indicators is that the more death threats they receive, assassination attempts they receive, that's an indicator. A positive indicator is that our imams are becoming very popular, and that's why they get the death threats from the radical imams. But the popular indicator is that I've been to Burundi and I've walked around with our imams, and they're very popular. As a matter of fact, one particular imam has won, he's a member of parliament, and he won by 87% of his constituency, right? So it's a good model for us to work, because that it's not just a religious thing, but they can also affect the cultural norms that we want, and eventually become members of parliament where laws can be passed.
Thank you. Next, Parry, I have a double question for you. Have the issues around religious freedom and gender changed at all since you started the Free Yazidi Foundation in 2014, taking into account that there's still thousands of Yazidi women and girls missing and problematic conditions for those who have been displaced?
Thank you very much, Judith. I don't know if this is on. No?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I say like the Free Yazidi Foundation, we really try to work for women's rights and those kind of things. But one thing you have to keep in mind is we do work in the Middle East, and it's very, very difficult to work as a women's organization in the Middle East and defend women's rights, and then also defending something that in the religion of the Yazidi community, which is very closed off, in a society that is very closed off, needs change to ensure that women have more rights. So over the last years, we've been working on those kind of things, but one of the things that has made things very difficult is that the root causes that created the genocide that happened in 2014 were never really targeted. So when I say that, I say about the idea that Yazidi women can be held as slaves, brings me to the point of still over 2,000 women are still missing. These women could be dead somewhere in Syria or in Iraq, but they could also still be in, for example, Al-Hol camp. I just visited recently Syria, where I saw that the ideology of the Islamic State was living forth. The idea that Yazidis should be murdered, Yazidi men should be murdered, women should be taken as slaves, and it is okay and approved by the Islamic State ideology that Yazidis could be enslaved and sold into sexual slavery. This is still happening. So it is not like, oh, this happened almost 9 years ago. No, this is still happening. This is still happening in Al-Hol camp. We have Yazidi women. There are Yazidis who have been able to tell us, I am 100% sure that my family member is in Al-Hol camp. We need to find a rescue mission or a way to save them. The Yazidi women are still missing is a stain on the humanitarian world, because you have not done anything, but also for the religious freedom part, because these women were kidnapped, forced to take on a new religion, convert to Islam, and take on the ideology of the Islamic State. And 9 years onward, this is still the case. So that is a stain on humanity.
Thank you. I'd like to now address some questions to all three of you. answer. And it follows the first question follows on something that Ari said. Given the cultures in which you all work, how do you help ensure that women come forth and speak, assert themselves and be heard? Who wants to take a credit?
I'll go. So in the United States and in the West, we basically, okay, well, we're creating our own alternative community and where women can lead prayer and lead women and men in prayer. And so that made a lot of head spin. But most importantly is to actually bypass the religious authorities and religious institutions and actually develop public educational content that we share through the social media networks and through our forums, etc., as a way to bypass the religious leaders here in the United States or wherever, and to give the constituency, the general public, the real deal, the real Islam that is egalitarian. And we have so much of it that we were not taught. And so from a religious context, it gives women really the language to defend themselves. So when we have like overnight camps for young women in Africa, we bring these young women for a 3-night overnight stay, and we basically train them about their rights, whether it be in Islam and international law, CEDAW. And so when they leave the camp, the overnight camps, women empowerment camp, they come up with the language that they can use to defend their rights, not just to their family, but to society. So that's one way.
The organization that I chair, Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations, what we do, we actually have a gender-based, a lady within the group that is really focused on gender issues within the conflict. So she actually works on gender issues. We make sure she attends trainings and things like that. And we, as a group, we do a lot of webinars, a lot of online training, both to women here and back home in Cameroon. We do a lot of training on how to speak, how to write grants. We train them on peace processes, how to speak, how to go out, do outreach to refugees and IDPs. So we do a lot of that work. And we make sure that when we are going out on advocacy about the conflict, we make sure that there's enough women representation as well. We've held lots of retreats, physical retreats, some in Europe, some in Canada, where we make sure that we bring enough women on board. And events like this, that we make sure that we try to have our input as well, and make sure that we let the women's voices be heard. We are doing a lot of work with trying to reach out to the government as well, just to make sure that when they are talking about their own sort of dialogue, they make sure that women are invited as well. And there are lots of NGOs out there who are helping us, like Humanity United. We started working with Lou, especially during the Africa Summit that was here, making sure that our women can speak for themselves. So it's a lot of training and capacity building that we need. We come from a background where women are not given that right to speak that much. So it's a lot of hard work just to make sure that they have the courage to be able to come out and speak.
Very much. So what I see, and I always say to people, is like, when you have people who are displaced, that is the time when you can make change. So in my community, our people were living in different villages, and every village had their own kind of tribal rules. So in one village, the girls were not allowed to go to school. In another village, the girls were not even allowed to go to a wedding of the neighboring village. So there were all these kind of different rules that had nothing to do with the religion, but with the culture or how they grew up. And now they're all displaced together in camps. So now all of a sudden the father of this girl sees that his neighbor's daughter is getting a job because she has an education. So now is the moment where we give education in women's rights. You have the right to go to school. Even if your father or mother says no, you can say, I want to go to school, I have the right to go to school. These are your rights as a citizen in Iraq. Most of them have never heard of that. but then they finally become actual participants of the society. And one of the things I wanted to say is like, how do you create that strength of these women and girls? And that is by creating income, not by giving them handouts. I do not believe in that. I've seen humanitarian aid is all about handouts and people still begging for more money, handouts. No, I want to make sure that tomorrow our organization doesn't need to have to exist and that people can live their own life. And one of the things that we've been doing is making sure that there is training and employment. So now we have women working in the Sugar is Sweet Cafe. So we opened an enterprise and training center. In the Sugar and Sweet Cafe is an idea that came from people not eating our food. Yazidis are devil worshippers. Yazidis, you shouldn't talk to them. You shouldn't eat their food. It's not good. You cannot eat their food. Why? Because they are not people of the book. They should be dead. This is the same ideology as the Islamic State, but people don't say it out loud. They say it behind closed doors. They say it in their households. How many people in Iraq have actually eaten Yazidi food or actually communicated with a Yazidi? There are these kind of barriers. So we opened the Sugar is Sweet Cafe. Our hope is to have a refrigerated car and now for the first time have Yazidi food in the biggest super chain market in one of the biggest cities. And this is success. And these women, even if we stop tomorrow, the Sugar is Sweet Cafe can still go on because these women got training. They got the understanding of why it is so important to make your products and bring it out. And there's always this story from the Christians, like breaking bread together. Like if you don't eat my food, I can economically never get anywhere, right? And Yazidis were always like in the agriculture. The other thing I wanted to say is we created these chunky animals. Some of these women, this is the first time they crochet something and there's actually demand. They literally are making constantly these stuffed animals and they are selling them to people. Some of the women telling us that this is the first time they have generated income. It's the first time they're able to read and write. It's the first time they can go by themselves without a chaperone, go to the doctor and know which room they have to go. Such basic necessity things that they can do on their own. They need a chaperone, but now they can because they can read and write. But also the income that they have created, I'm sorry, I speak a lot, but this is the last thing I want to say. The income that they are generating, it has become a voice. For the first time ever, these women are asked their opinion related to the household, related to decision-making of the family. This is so important because so many decisions are being made by men in our community that have a result, most of the time bad result, on the women and the children. And that needs to end. And we're a women's organization with over 115 staff members. So we're very proud to say that 95% of our staff is women. So.
We have time for one last question, and Harry, you sort of like suggested what it is. I want you guys to tell us about some of the successes you feel you have experienced in the last couple of years in your work. We focus a lot about challenges, but I think let's end with some successes.
A couple of points. The other organization I work with, Cameroon Humanitarian Relief Initiative, we've done a lot of work with giving grants and funding to organizations, to refugees. We have a lot of refugees back in Nigeria. And just like she was explaining, we have given a lot of funding to those refugees to get training, to do, if some of you know, a lot of our women do tailoring. So we've given them a lot of grants to buy the tailoring machines in the refugee camps. So they actually do some work for themselves and get income. A lot of them will give them seed money to do paintings. So they do a lot of paintings and sell. A lot of them will train them to be hairdressers. So we do a lot of that work in the refugee camps. We have set up a program where we take food to the maximum security jail back in Cameroon, in Yaoundé, where a lot of the political prisoners, especially women, have been locked up. So we go there with food every 2 weeks, sanitary products, give them healthcare for those prisoners. We are also very proud to say that as part of CDN, our advocacy for a peaceful resolution to the conflict is working. We have a lot of work now ongoing with the US government. Some of you must have heard of the so-called Swiss process, which failed, but we are now working with the Canadians on the Canadian peace process. And a lot of the work that CDN does in the background is bring the armed groups together. So we actually do a lot of capacity building for the non-state armed groups. We brought them to a retreat in Canada recently, and we funded all of that with help from other INGOs. So we do a lot of capacity building, getting them ready for talks, for pre-talks, for negotiations. And a lot of the governments are actually paying attention. We have the EU involved, we have the Norwegians involved, and all of these governments, the UK governments, all of these people, we are actually advocating and reaching out to them and talking to them. And the hope is that in the next few months or years, we can have a peaceful resolution to the conflict. So our hope is that we are able to, I know it's me making a pitch here, our hope is that we can get more funding to do this kind of work, because we really reach out to the armed groups. We actually have contact with them, trying to plead with them to drop their arms. We help the refugees a lot and the prisoners in jail. So we carry on with this kind of work. And it's been successful because the international community is paying attention.
Pitch away. How about successes? Very briefly.
You go first, Mary.
Okay, thank you. I would say be there and be seen. That is one of the biggest successes. At the first day when I was in Iraq and I saw that there was no place for women to be in the dialogue, be involved, and now I see change with so many women and girls wanting to be part of that change that we are creating and making. And there's now finally like acceptance. There's acceptance that the Free Yazidi Foundation is a women's organization and they are bringing change. And there's acceptance with the religious leaders. There's acceptance with the fathers who would used to say, no, you cannot go to school. There's acceptance among the community that the change that we create is beneficial towards the community living as an ethnic religious minority inside of Iraq, where there's just no space for minorities to really be themselves and be participants of the economy, participants of any dialogue that happens that relates back to them, let alone like climate change and those kind of things. But I want to say that like also we have become a organization that is there for the people. So when I say the people, I mean all the people, the women that have children born from rape after the genocide. We now have cases that we're working on and supporting those women. They have nowhere else to go. Literally, they've knocked on doors, they've been refused. We are helping women, we are helping people from the LGBTQ community in our community. Behind the scenes, we're getting requests. This is being approachable. This is being able to change and talk to ethnic and religious, religious leaders about the change that their community wants and need. So there's much more to do, but there's a lot of success we can speak about.
Ani, really briefly, we run out of
Sure. One good indicator is that when you see villagers from the next village coming to the villages that are led by our imam to come and pray because they prefer the messaging in our imam, we know that's a very good indicator. And by creating that environment, what is really important is that creating that safe ecosystem for women and young women in particular to actually survive and really excel in society. When they start a business, they need to know that they're going to be safe starting a business. And when you support them, the cohorts with seed funding to start the business, you can see them really flourish because it's not just the women succeeding, but the society also is benefiting from it as well. So the indicators, the numbers are there. We just need to emphasize, we need to scale up. That takes funding.
We have time for one or two questions from the audience. Any questions?
If we can, for everyone here, we have the entire room that works in this space. So the question is, what can we do to help?
Like I said earlier, I'm not going to mince my words. My two organizations, CDN, we do a lot of advocacy for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. The CHRI, we do a lot of work with the refugees, the prisoners, and the IDP. So we train them, we give them a way to carry on life while the conflict is going on. But for the CBN, my plea, and I get emotional when I say this, my plea is that for everybody here, if you can advocate for us, if you can open any doors, put pressure on the warring parties to end the conflict, it will help. One way is advocating with your governments. Another way is working with us CBN. Like I said, we are doing a lot of work directly with the non-state armed groups, trying to train them on human rights, train them on humanitarian access. So we need the funding, we need trainers among yourselves. You need people amongst yourselves who can come and do webinars and talk to the people directly. But we really need to be able to have the funds to reach out to these people and make sure that we can find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. We are planning a retreat in July for the warring parties to make sure that they can come together and talk to each other. But we need help. Thank you.
I would say one of the things is always funding. Without funding, the women leaders in this field will stop existing. I had the opportunity to do this voluntarily for many years, and now finally I have a salary, and people have 401k, and my staff has like actual health insurance. Many years ago, this was not possible, right? So that needs to be first. People need core funding to be able to hire the right people that can help and support them with programming. Another thing is like research. Research is needed so we can have the numbers, we can have the findings, we can have the outcomes of the importance of these like subjects. Like we can talk about these many days and go on, but we need to have numbers. How many women are actually suffering? What are the findings of these issues? What can we do better? And the last thing is, because I talked with Judith and Luann, I talked so many times about this issue that in the beginning I saw government officials went only to the male members of our community. I was disgusted as a woman who grew up in Europe that everyone from every country would go and look for the men. Why? That is so insulting. We have women in our community who are able to speak up, and we need to be acknowledged.
Okay, so there's two things. One is the curriculum. We have a curriculum that we use in the madrasas where we teach young children about women and girls' rights and freedom of religion and belief. And we do this by taking the Sustainable Development Goals, we strip the human rights language away, and then we attach the Quran and sacred texts to back up the SDGs. We develop a storyline and cartooning around it because a lot of these children are basically left in the madrasas and all they do is memorize the Quran. And that's what they do in madrasas. So what we do is that, well, here's a curriculum for you imam to utilize in your schools. And the benefit, the feedback that we've been getting is that these imams that are in our network, we have more than 1,300 imams now, and they're saying, oh my God, we've always wanted to talk about women and girls' rights and the issues within our community, but we don't know how to teach them. So now they have the lesson plans to do it. The parents are also coming back to us and saying, oh my God, I had no idea there was a way of teaching Islam a different way without beating my child to death, right? Because the way it's taught is horrible in madrasas. And so I think this is the next generation that we need to address. 2030 is 7 years away. I don't think we're going to meet those targets. And so we need to start thinking, well, what's the next target? How can we mold the next generation? That's one thing. Number two, the US government and all of you here, when you work with Muslim religious leaders, please ask them hard questions about what is your position on really basic human rights. Do the women in your mosque actually walk through the front door as the men do? Or do they have a separate back door that they have to come through? Can we just please ask some hard questions? What is your positions about LGBT rights? What are your positions on various issues that you claim to support as religious leaders? They're so good at talking about it externally, but within their own community, they're not honest about it. So that's the test. If you support Black Lives Matter, well, do you allow your daughter to marry a Black man? Come on now. You know, let's ask some hard questions. So that would be my ask to everyone.
Thank you. Well, I think we've run out of time. I'm sorry.
Very quick question.
It's in the report.
Yeah.
In the report. So I'd like to turn it over to you to close our session.
And I'm gonna be brief. Wow. Just one of them, but this is 3. Imagine, we talked to many. There's stories like this. We would get off every interview for an hour and a half, and you would think there's not another Judith, there's not another Ani, there's not another Perry, and they're in every country, in every religion. So these efforts can achieve their full potential when they are, listen to me, we're all done here, adequately resourced, including granting funding for research, capacity building, training, and advocacy. Yes, the table needs to be reset with an expanded number of seats, but not just the women. We have some men champions here. Let's give it up for the men champions. We're not men bashers. We're against the thought that there are marginalizations still because of how you were born and who you are. Guess what? We've got good news. We've identified we can support structural change. You can make a significant difference. I remember we got off the call with Erin Singh Shenshuk, and she said, Lou and Judy, think big. And that's what I say to you today. Let's all help accentuate and accelerate. Thank you for joining us. And importantly, you can access the report at forbwomen.org, FORB women.org, right on the homepage. Thank you very much. And you can join us for lunch.
So eat.